Michael Smiley is going to kick us off.
Well, is this on? Can you
It's not
hear?
for the PA, it's just for the record.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Tim, for starting with me. I don't have anything prepared or rehearsed on this, but I do have some thoughts about a subject of interest. And it relates to this word community that we use a lot in our work. And it's sort of universal, all landscape architecture and the design professions around the world. And one of our big goals is always to create community, either if we're building communities or revitalizing communities. The big goal is how do we create communities where it didn't exist, or how we can bring a sense of community back, or how we can create specific facilities that communities can use. And to me, the sense of community is, this idea of community is very important. But there's another aspect to that term, as I think about it, and that is the notion that we all are of a community. In fact, we in this room are a community. And we're part of an extended community of landscape architects that exists all around the world. And so in that respect, we have a lot in common with this particular community that we're a part of. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is the idea that landscape architecture can be something that creates an international community. And because we're living in times right now where with all this nationalism going on, it's well advertised, the kind of nationalistic split and the kinds of things that happen with Brexit here, and we observe that and the conflict. And in the U.S., we've got a tremendous amount of conflict, and it's kind of tears apart at communities. And a lot of it, sort of my feeling about that is, well, at least personally, I'm totally the opposite. I feel like, particularly at the international level, we should be doing everything we can to be fostering communication and fostering community at an international level. How many landscape architecture firms have built international community? And there's very few, but this is one of them that did and does and has done. And the thing that's interesting about that is that, for instance, I came from San Francisco originally, and I have a community here of landscape architects, and also a larger community of people that I met during the time I was here. Many people in this room have gone to Singapore and Hong Kong and all these other places as a result of Brian Clouston and Partners, and built a community not only with other fellow professionals, but with the families of some of the local people you met. And so it's created this larger international community that's great for communication. It's great for so many things about bringing the world together instead of pulling the world apart. And I think that is so important now about how we bring the world together. And I think that this organization has done a tremendous amount to build a sense of international community. And I think that is something, in terms of legacy, that to me is an amazing legacy that has been left behind.
Thank you very much, Michael. Hold it there, Chris. Yeah, don't need to do it.
Okay. It's interesting you should mention community. In a sense, the Landscape Institute is a community, but it was a far better community before the Institute destroyed the branches. And that they stopped the branch work because of the Data Protection Act. And that was something that could easily be got over. But I think we're far worse off now because we don't have lively, functioning branches locally so that we can have some community. I don't even know how to get hold of my own branch here.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to pick up on the international theme by asking Jane Knight for her thoughts.
I think it's interesting, actually. This gathering has given us the opportunity, I think, to think about that idea of community and network. And actually, it's interesting that the whole idea of Clouston and Brian's influence has kind of, he probably doesn't realise, but it's actually followed me throughout my whole career. He taught me at Newcastle University back in the 1970s, actually no, 1980s, and his lectures were probably the most inspiring thing about that course, to be fair. And then I started my career just down the road here in South Shields, but then very quickly managed to win a fellowship to go and study in the United States, which gave me a tremendous toolkit, I think, that has held me in pretty good stead as my career has developed. And when I came back and was looking for work, everybody that I interviewed was either one of the companies that had been spawned by Clouston, or and there was this kind of underriding theme. And actually through John Hopkins, who is obviously no longer with us and was very instrumental in the Olympic Park, he introduced me to Annie, which then got me out to Hong Kong, where I think the scale of the projects that we were involved in was that, and the positivity and the can-do attitude has been really interesting, and it was fantastic to be part of that. And coming back from Hong Kong and seeing, you know, other people who'd spent their careers in this country, and we'd just got so much experience from being out in that Asian environment. And I think a cultural sensitivity that has taken me into the thing that I do at the moment, which is I'm the landscape architect at the Eden Project, which and most of the time now I'm engaged with developing new Eden projects around the world. So I'm part of a multi-disciplinary team, which again is something that I learnt in Hong Kong as a place that I wanted to be, working with other disciplines and seeing things from a different perspective. But I think the whole idea of, you know, what we as landscape architects can bring to the bigger picture of the world, if you like, and a positivity, I think, is something that has kind of been as a result of the experiences that I've had. And also, I think, having some really good mentors, again, Annie being a prime example, and people that have kind of given you probably more responsibility than your years might have warranted at the time. And, you know, it's much appreciated, and I think and it all comes, I guess, down to this idea of Clouston family and network, and it goes beyond the shores of this country for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah.
So, Alex, you've done lots of work overseas and currently been working in Canada.
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to start by saying, Brian, I don't suppose you know quite how much influence you've had on our lives. Bill asked me, you know, how much I'd enjoyed my career in landscape architecture. Well, I said it's been unbelievable. You know, I'd never dreamt that we'd be doing what we did when I was a student, or before I'd ever heard of landscape architecture. And I think it's been said, but you dropped us in at the deep end. You know, you said, here it is, get on with it. You were there to give advice, always, and you were there to pick up the pieces, which you had to do on one or two occasions. But we gained enormous experience and confidence. And if there's one word, I think, that sums us all up, it's confidence. And so when it came to, you know, setting up Bristol after the Dryden Street office, or it then subsequently came to setting up Novell Tullett after leaving RPS, it didn't seem any different from what I'd been doing before. You know, it was just more of doing the same thing. and the big projects came in. We were able to lead the big projects at home and overseas. I owe a lot to you, Brian, for that, really. Now, I think the other thing to say is that there's a sort of a thread that runs through our lives with Clouston. And one of the, you mentioned Canadian work, but one of the interesting things was that you set a meeting up, Brian, with Eddie Kemp for me at Dundee Botanical Gardens. That was before we did Yambu. And Eddie was working on setting up a botanical gardens there, but with the influence on naturalistic plant displays. So looking at plants in there with their natural associations, their ecology, their natural habitat, and he wanted to try and display plants and teach people really in that way. Now, many years later, I got the opportunity to set up a new botanical gardens at the University of Acadia in Nova Scotia. And we took those ideas on and created naturalistic habitat for a whole range of plants. The whole botanical gardens and environmental research centre that went with it was based on the local flora of the Acadia Forest region, which was essentially maritime Canada and down into the USA. And when I think back to that one meeting, you know, with Eddie Kemp, that led to one of the most worthwhile projects I've ever done. And I think that just shows how this golden thread really runs through our careers.
Thank you, Alex. Ian Turkington is going to share his thoughts.
Thank you. Is that okay? Talking like this?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think I'd share Alex's a view on the kind of the responsibility that came out of working at Clouston's, and certainly for me and my contemporaries in the London office in the 80s, we were given incredible responsibility very early on in our careers as graduates, really, with quite large projects sort of landed on our drawing boards, as we had then, and sort of got told to get on with it in a way. But obviously, I was mentored by Tim, who has been a lifelong mentor, actually, and friend coming out of that office. There was also a spirit of entrepreneurialism, I think, which might have been the spirit of the times, but I think it was certainly encouraged at Clouston's. And there were probably maybe 5 or 6 practices that ultimately came out of the Blackfriars office, myself and Lindsay Whitelaw. We actually met. I mean, Lindsay Whitelaw was working with Alex in Dryden Street. We met and subsequently became very good friends, and then went our separate ways, but then joined up to create Whitelaw Turkington, which became, I think, I would say it myself, a very successful practice, but based very much on the kind of principles of entrepreneurialism and giving people early responsibility early in their careers and mentoring them. And I think that was a sort of culture that exists in Blackfriars, which we certainly carried forward into our own practice. And interestingly, I mean, unfortunately, there's probably not a lot of evidence remaining of some of the projects that we did produce in the London office. I mean, you talked about the work at London Docklands, Surrey Quays in particular, and a couple of years ago, I actually took one of our clients, Peabody, who are one of our major clients now. I actually took them to the Surrey Canal. Because we're working on a project in Thamesmead, which was all about sustainable drainage and harnessing water and putting water at the heart of an urban environment. And that is a fantastically innovative example, actually. And it was looking absolutely fantastic. Of course, I claimed all the credit for it, inevitably.
Something you learned from Brian.
But it was sort of it didn't. I would say it surprised me. It was a pleasant surprise that it had actually been looked after, because many of the landscapes that we worked on at that period, sadly, haven't really been looked after. In fact, many of them have been dug up and redeveloped, because a lot of them were a part of a sort of 25-year development cycle, and it sort of says something about the length of your career when projects that you worked on in the early days are actually no longer exist because of that. So I'm immensely proud of the work that we did with Brian in London with Tim and Tony. I think it was fantastic, and it set me up, certainly, gave me the confidence to set up my own practice. And I'm probably one of the few people here who is actually still working. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But we're still producing brilliant landscapes.
Thank you, Ian. Over to someone else who's still working, I think. Peter Sandover.
Thank you, Tim. I echo Alex and Ian's comments, and I think that. And I think the point you mentioned, Alex, about golden threads, I'm slightly bouncing backwards and forwards, but one of the things I do now is do a lot of community engagement and running community projects, and it goes back to one of Mike's comments, but we're always saying the golden thread, starting with a vision and working your way through all the stages and linking them all together and being able to explain later how those connections were made. And I think that was something I learned very early days with Brian's involvement, and particularly and Tim and Tony and the late Pete Dowen. I'm a bit of an interloper today because I'm an architect, not a landscape architect. But sorry about that. Well, I'd say. And the reason I started at Clouston's literally 6 months after leaving university, and Tony interviewed me, and I think the fact that he was a landscape architect and architect, I'm not sure you'd done your part fours at that stage, Tony, but that idea appealed to me, and it was this idea of multidisciplinary working, landscape leading projects, and actually the most appropriate, well, not always, but most appropriately when they should be landscape led, and working with a broad team of people which we can either manage or be part of the family. So I've taken that through my career. I was at Clouston's from 80 to 87, and after a short spell in Saudi Arabia, I spent 8 years in Hong Kong. And I was fortunate at that stage that I already had a couple of excursions in Hong Kong before, so I was already knew that the Clouston family in Hong Kong, and when I came back working for Llewellyn Davis in Hong Kong, I felt still part of that family, and I was in a very good position to then be a commissioner of landscape architects in some of our major projects coming up, building up to the handover of Hong Kong and the building of the airport, etc. So I was eternally grateful for some of the skills I learned, and I think one of the points that going back to my first point about engagement with communities, I'll never forget some of the engagement processes that Tony and I engaged in Hartsmere with quite vociferous and quite angry communities, and actually I enjoyed that. I enjoyed engaging people and explaining and actually trying to simplify the process that we were going through, and that was a skill I learned then, and I still employ it now. So thank you all.
Thank you. And I hope you'll share your secret of eternal youth with us later. Mark Loxton.
Well, what can I say after all this? The common theme seems to me, having seen all of the work that Clouston's and colleagues have done over these 40 or 50 years, is the range, the competence, the long-term view that's gone on. And that all stems from Brian having faith in us all sitting here. And it also reflects that we've all sprouted from this seed into new practices. new positions like Jane's and so forth with great confidence. And I personally am very grateful for that, because Brian did give you responsibility, and if you rose to it, you went forward. And in my own case, not only did Clouston's offer this opportunity, but also, as you can see, we all had experience of working abroad, which does broaden your horizons and does involve you in other communities and other points of view. I left Clouston's to work for the GLC for a while, and then went to work for Shanklin Cox, which was an international firm of planners, being appointed a director on an equal basis to architects and planners. And I don't think I would have had that confidence had I not been, or I had not had the experience with Clouston. So it has led to, the legacy has led to some incredible things. And in my own experience of then leaving Shanklin Cox to form my own practice with Robert Adams, which went on for 32 years, and now I have been fortunate enough for that practice to go forward to another young practice which has just started, called Boone Brown. And this young landscape architect is joined with architects and planners, and history is repeating itself. But I was able, through my experiences, to pass that on, and I feel very privileged. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Annie.
Okay, so I'm going to say very little about me and just name a few other people, because I know Annabelle and Helen would value a few other names to follow up in terms of what they've done. So I'm still working, and I work as a planning inspector on major infrastructure at the moment, and I chair various design review panels as well. And the infrastructure experience that I had in Hong Kong has been invaluable, and we're still arguing about the same things with engineers on occasions. And another individual, Robert Howard, who is a director in the Singapore office, and also he was employed for the Castle Peak backslopes in Hong Kong initially. He is now one of the senior landscape architects on HS2, and so his current job is very definitely, not a result, but has benefited from the experience that he's had, that he had with Clouston in Hong Kong. And then we've got academics, so Alan Tate, a professor, and Gavin Coates, also a professor. Gavin in Hong Kong, and he takes his students to Yuen Long Town Park and to Sha Tin Town Park. So, you know, there's someone who worked in the office, and now he's bringing along the next generation of landscape architects, using our projects as examples. Neil, who's here, partner at Austin Smith Lord, and, you know, not only has Neil had to sort of being involved in really demanding projects, but also really sort of big corporate demanding situations, which, you know, some of the, he's laughing, but he wasn't at the time, you know, but also learning some of that sort of corporate skill from what he saw Brian and the rest of us doing. John Hopkins, who, as Jane mentioned, died very suddenly, but was the project sponsor for all the landscape architecture on the Olympic Park. And then John Dainton, who was the project landscape architect on Sha Tin Town Park, then left landscape design, and he set up his own company called Asia Rock Art, and basically he manufactured plastic rocks. And I mean, that's belittling it, but you know, his schemes just, and the rocks that his company produced just benefited so much from the design skills that he had and the work that he'd done on Sha Tin Town Park with real rocks. And then finally, people have talked about me as a mentor. Sorry. Which just, you know, and I think there's something about women needing women mentors, and Jenny Steed was mine.
Thank you very much, Annie. I think one of the significant things about our profession has been it's about 50-50 men and women, and I do think that has a very profound effect on the profession and our outlook. So I'm just going to wind up this session by saying that, like the others, I think one of the great gifts you gave us, Brian, was the ability to develop our own self-confidence. And certainly one's able to draw on that because you allowed us to go to whatever the limit was, and I'm not sure whether any of us knew quite what it was, but it did develop our self-confidence, which is an extraordinary gift to have. And of course it does involve you being thrown in the deep end. You used to ask me to go to the British Consultants Bureau quite often, which was populated by the leading consultants of the time in London, who were at least 30 years younger than me, but I'm sure that it did me good in the long term. So we're going to now move on to a recording that Brian and Tom Robinson did yesterday about their future project. But we will need to do a little bit of rearrangement of the table, so bear with us. Don't go away.